May God open our ears to hear, our eyes to see, our hearts to love. Today is the first Sunday after Epiphany, which is the 6th of January, and I've chosen to use the Bible readings for Epiphany, which was actually on Wednesday. The 12 days of Christmas ended, and at Epiphany, the story of the astrologers, the wise ones, is told. So here we are on this glorious summer morning, perhaps eager to get outside and enjoy another perfect day. And we are faced with this old story of the wise ones, with the despotic power of Herod and the injunction to go home by another road, by another way. This is one of those stories where the story is more important than the facts. You don't have to study biblical studies or astronomy or archaeology to know if it's true. You just have to listen to the story. And there are two aspects of the story that I want to touch upon this morning. The first is the significance of people of another faith in the Jesus story. And the second is that injunction to the wise ones to avoid a return to Herod, to avoid a return to empire, to go home by another way. It's a bit hard to hear the story of the Magi's visit to the child Jesus without thinking about Christmas pageants of days gone by, children in dressing gowns with towels on their heads, carrying fake gifts, gold, frankincense and myrrh, pretending to be Oriental sages. In a more surreal fashion, it's hard for me to hear the story without picturing the adult members of the Monty Python cast worshipping the infant Brian. I had a bit of a ritual for a few years of watching the life of Brian on Good Friday afternoon, so it's sadly a bit stuck in my head. Nevertheless, underneath the layers of carols, pageants, folklore, and costumes, the story of the Magi is ultimately a tragic story of ruthless power and infanticide. And it is part of the context of the incarnation of Emmanuel, God with us. What is often lost in both the cuteness and the tragedy of the story is the simple fact that Matthew has these visitors finding the Christ child by way of astrology. As the first speaking humans in Matthew's gospel, the Magi ask, "Where is the child who has been born ruler of the Jews? For we have observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." This unusual route from the stars to the Christ is unique to Matthew's story and quite surprising given the numerous occasions in the Hebrew Bible when astral cults are strongly condemned. So it is also a story for our time as we think about our faith in the context of other faiths, of non-religious spirituality and atheism. Mostly the Church's automatic response to alternative spiritualities is reactionary, moving between feeling threatened about Christianity's loss of authority and a determination to refute such deceptions with the one truth. The King James translation of Magi as wise men made an indelible mark on the English-speaking consciousness, but it avoided the obvious translation of magicians. The 1857 hymn by John Henry Hopkins Jr., "We Three Kings of Orient Are," makes the connection between the Magi and the declarations found in Isaiah that nations shall come to your light and kings to the brightness of your dawn. At best, this is a tenuous connection, drawn from the royal nature of the gifts that they bring. Given the plot of the story, with its emphasis on the appearance and significance of a star, the most obvious identification of the Magi would have been that they were astrologers. But maybe such a blatant pagan identification was too much to bear for some of the translators. People of another race, another religion, foreigners, aliens. Brian McLaren, a progressive writer from the evangelical stream of Christianity, has written a book for evangelicals on thinking about Christianity in relation to other faiths. For most of us, the acceptance of other faiths is simply not an issue. Of course, there are other paths that we respect and live alongside. But I enjoy McLaren's writings, and he is speaking to people who still struggle with the teaching that Jesus is the only way, and that as Christians we are to make disciples of all nations. So here is how he responded to a question about converting others on his blog. It's quite a long quotation, but I think it's worth hearing. McLaren says, "I believe in and am committed to the Great Commission, but I wouldn't define it as converting people to the Christian religion. I would define it as making disciples of Jesus, or learners of the way of Jesus, by proclaiming the good news of the commonwealth of God." He says, "Thankfully, there are more and more Christians who are expressing their discomfort with the ways of living their faith characterized by hostility and are seeking better ways instead. And there are more and more Muslims, Hindus, Jews, and atheists feeling the same way. That's why I can simultaneously believe that Jesus is the key for humanity, as I fervently do believe, without believing that the Christian story is intended to have any sort of supremacy. I believe that the way of Jesus, the way of love, faith, hope, reconciliation, radical rethinking, service, self-giving, respect for creation, full surrender to the Spirit, truly is the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to God based on following a religious agenda of hate, fear, despair, division, conventional thinking, domination, greed, disrespect for creation." McLaren concludes, "We can be evangelical by seeking to live and spread the good news of God proclaimed by Jesus, which is a call to love God with our all, to love our neighbour as ourselves, extending that love of neighbour as Jesus taught and modelled to stranger, outcast, enemy, and others, whatever their religion, including our non-human neighbours in creation." That's the end of the McLaren quote. Matthew's story of the Magi gives the church an occasion to understand that people may come to know the God who meets us in Jesus through other paths. It's hard to imagine that Matthew could have included this portion of Jesus' story without being able to believe that God is able to work in and through a very alien form of faith. It is important work to proclaim this space for other paths in a time when Muslim people are being vilified and harassed. This year, how will we act in solidarity with Muslim people in Australia and with Muslim asylum seekers and refugees and people of other faiths who are fleeing from Syria and other war-torn countries? The other aspect of the story that I want to consider is the phrase, "go home by another road," or "go home by another way." The wise ones came bearing gifts that were just wrong for a newborn baby, despite Jenny Gordon's rather beautiful reinterpretation of the meaning of the gifts. You've probably heard the joke about how different it would have been if there had been 3 wise women. They would have asked for directions, arrived on time, helped deliver the baby, cleaned the stable, made the casserole, and brought practical gifts. But maybe the wise ones' epic fail in the gift department means that they received more than they gave. Maybe they recognised how inappropriate their gifts for the powerful were in the face of the holy made known in a newborn baby. I like to imagine that Mary let them hold the baby and that they experienced the sacred in the vulnerable, damp, soft, living weight in their arms. There is a 15th century painting of their visit by Ghirlandaio titled The Adoration. In it, the oldest of the wise ones kneels at the manger while Jesus coyly lifts his own loincloth to let the old man admire his humanity. It sounds a little creepy, but actually I think it is a reminder that what the wise ones found was not a royal being, but a human baby. And in dreams, they heard the call to change their direction, their lives, to turn away from the abusive empire-building, genocidal power of Herod, to go home another way. At the beginning of this new year, we can choose to go home by another way. We can look back on what has been, we can celebrate some of it, we can let go of some of it. And for all that we choose to let go of, we can choose to go home another way. For home is our journey, not a destination. And though Herod is always there, entrapping us with secret deals and delusional thinking, enticing us to power or to apathy, we can choose another way. A way of saving, regenerating love. Love of self, neighbour, even enemy. A way that can change us and our world. So I now invite you to go where you want to in your dreams and imaginations as you listen to James Taylor's song about going home another way, and to reflect on your journey in 2016, and to be assured that wherever you go in this year, you are not alone. Amen.